Hey everyone, and welcome back to episode 35 of my Create Mod series. Now today I'm going to show you in all of the different ways that you can transport power inside of the Create Mod. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe as I make a ton of Create Mod content and you are not going to want to miss this. Now, I've also already made a video on how you can use all the different power sources inside of the Create mod and which one that you should use for certain situations. That video is popping up on the screen right now. This is going to go over on how to transport that power to all of your systems and the most efficient ways to do that. I've also already made a video on how to transport all of the items inside of Create mod and the best ways to do that, so feel free to check that out as well on the screen. But other than that, let's jump straight into the video. So we're going to go ahead and go real basics and starting out with shafts. If you already know this section, feel free to skip over it. I'm going to have tons of timestamps throughout the video. But to start out, shafts. Most basic way of transporting power is that you have some type of power source. I'm going to use creative motors, but like water wheels, encased fans, things along those lines. And a shaft can allow you to basically transport in one direction horizontally. Also, if you have your power source up and down, like so, you could also transport it vertically. Not too useful, but good to transport in straight lines, and that's where gearboxes come in. So a gearbox is going to allow a shaft rotational power source to go inside of a gearbox, and then it can be transported out in multiple directions vertically. Something to keep in mind is you can see that our power source is coming in clockwise, and as it goes straight across, it turns into the opposite direction. Kind of keep that in mind because if you're using like belts and things like that where direction matters, this can cause some issues, but this can also be a solution. If your belt's changing the wrong direction, simply put a gearbox in and it fixes that. But it does allow you to transport in multiple directions. The next one you probably guessed is the vertical gearbox. Vertical gearbox is exactly the same as a regular gearbox, but it transports rotational power vertically. You can also get one that goes out horizontally. Just keep in mind that it's not on all sides like the regular gearbox. But I also want to go ahead and quickly cover is that you can use casings like andesite and brass casings to actually cover your shafts if you're going for more of a build look. So you can just simply grab a casing and place it on a shaft and it will cover your power source. Super useful when you're covering up machines, trying to make it look a little bit better. You could just use some casings. Now, I'm also going to go over our next thing, which is going to be our small cogwheels. And this is going to be in combinations usually with shafts and gearboxes. So you can see we have a power source going in through a shaft connected to a vertical gearbox, and then we have a small cogwheel placed on top. And this actually is allowing us to power our mechanical arm. Of course, it's not hooked up to anything, but if we did, this is how we could power it, because a mechanical arm cannot be powered through shafts. So just a nice cogwheel attached to shafts or gearboxes allows you to do that. And something that if you're really early on in the game would be like the mechanical crafters of how do you power those guys? You're going to power them with a small cogwheel and a power source. Now, if you're setting up mechanical crafters, feel free to check out the video that just popped up on the screen that talks about all about the mechanical crafting and speed and all those different things. That's definitely the direction to go. Don't just copy this design because this actually might not work depending on your power source. Now, continuing on with cogwheels, we have the small ones right here, and this is going to allow us to transport power horizontally without using shafts and tons of gearboxes. So you can see that if we just connect several small cogwheels together, that we can make a straight line of different power sources. Again, keep in mind that the rotation is going to change depending on how many cogwheels you place down. So you can see we got counterclockwise, clockwise, counter, and then clockwise. Again, keep that in mind if you're powering like belts, things along those lines. But that does bring us over to our next version of cogwheels, which is our large cogwheels. Now, there's going to be a couple uses for these, but they work the best when they're in combination with small ones. But I do want to point out that if you have a power source, that you can use two large cogwheels to basically do exactly like a gearbox was able to do, to basically change direction. So you can see that we had vertically and now we have horizontally. Again, I recommend a gearbox. A lot less space is going to be taken up, but this is an option. But you're also able to use these guys in combination with speedometers to increase and decrease speed if you do not have a speed controller. Now, if you don't know what a speed controller is, in summary, it allows you to take your power source and speed it up or slow it down and allow you to power multiple machines, or like for a mixer, allow you to bring it up to the speed that it needs to process. Now, that being said, a speedometer is a block that you're able to use to actually calculate your speed. So you can see that off of our creative motor, we have it running through a small cogwheel, and the power source is actually giving 16 RPMs. Now, a cool little trick is that if you use small cogwheels and large cogwheels, you can naturally bring up or slow down speed. So A small cogwheel to a large cogwheel will actually decrease the speed. So it originally was 16 RPMs and now it's 8 RPMs, which might not be too useful for multiple people in this video. It'll allow you to power multiple machines, but they'll be slower. So there is a kind of a disadvantage to that. But you can also use this same combination by going large to small, and that will go from 16 RPMs to 32 RPMs. And you can continue this combination going over and over and over to get a very large amount of speed until your machine could no longer power that much. So this is kind of a nice little trick in the beginning if you're trying to get like a mixer up and running, but you don't have your speed controller because you don't have mechanical crafting yet. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to also link you to that mechanical crafter video because I do go over that whole entire gear switching change thing to kind of basically perfect your speed to what you're looking for. Something else that I did want to point out is that you can actually hook up a redstone signal to a speedometer, and you can see right here we have 8 RPMs just slowly turning, and you can see that if we use a redstone comparator that it's going to give off 1 and 2 basically redstone power, and then it stops. And as we go ahead and speed up this machine, it will actually power more and more redstone. So you could maybe use this as some kind of clock, or maybe turn on like a redstone lamp when it's above a certain speed, things along those lines. I've seen many different uses, especially when you're building like a factory and stuff along those lines, that you might have a way of increasing speed, and then you can have a lantern turn on or something when redstone is at a certain signal. So there's some ideas, more design specs besides this, but I figured it was worth pointing it out inside this video. Now, you've heard me mention it multiple times. The speed controller is the way to go once you're able to make them. It's a lot less space than the whole gear trick that we're using over there. And basically what you're able to do is you take a power source like a water wheel and you run it into a speed controller, and then you can just attach a large cogwheel to the top. And this will allow you to change the speed depending on what you would like. Now, you can see if we look at it that it's set to 16 RPMs currently. And you can see that right now we are outputting 16 RPMs through this large cogwheel. Now, I know for a fact that from this water wheel, if we look at it with goggles on, that the max it can do is 256 stress units. So what we can do is actually up this guy and continue to speed him up until it's all the way at 256 RPMs. So you can see it's coming in slow and it's outputting at 256 RPMs, which is insanely fast. Really great for like mixers and things like that if you want it to mix very fast. That being said, of course, if you attach multiple machines, a single water wheel is not going to be able to handle multiple machines running at 256 RPMs, but you can control your speed right here, that I can drop it down to 16 or even less to handle more machines off of a single water wheel. But I figured it was worth pointing this out. Something else to kind of keep in mind is that if you attach a shaft to the end and you speed it up, this shaft is not going to change speed. The value that's at the top, so the large cogwheel that is at the top, is the thing that's going to change speed. And vice versa. If you're running a water wheel into the large cogwheel out top, then the shaft speed will change. It's not both of these guys. So just keep that in mind. I've screwed up on multiple occasions during my building during this, but it's always the opposite that's going to have the speed change. Now, I also wanted to point out that you can also decorate cogwheels, large cogwheels, and shafts using brackets. So you can see that right here, we have a couple different brackets. I'll pull them up. So you can see that we have wooden brackets and we have metal brackets. Just a nice little design change, kind of like the casings that we used earlier. So if you're trying to go ahead and make your machine look a little bit better, you can actually use brackets to kind of spoof it up a little bit. Now, we've talked about the speedometer. Now I want to talk about the stressometer. Now, the stressometer now deals with stress. Now, you've probably heard stress units, and if you're really new to the Create mod, you're probably a little bit lost. This is something I really struggled with. Now, the main gist of stress is that you have a power source coming in, and as it attaches to machines, it's going to go ahead and create stress. So, I mean, we got to fix this really quick. But you can see that right now we're not attached to any machines. So if we throw it into a stressometer, we're not using any percentage of stress, and we still have 256 stress units left. Now, as you can see over here, we have a water wheel running through 2 crushing wheels, and we're actually at a high stress of 100% of 256 stress units because each of these guys is 128 stress units. So we're actually maxed out. So if we attached anything to the stressometer, our machine would break. So let's just literally just attach a mechanical press. If we attach it, we're now overstressed. And that's because we've hit our max and we're now in the negative of negative 128 stress units. So a solution to this is, if you have your goggles on, you're looking at a stressometer, is you either need to break off your machine that's creating too much stress, or you need to add more power to the source. So all we would need to do is simply add a second water wheel, and this would allow us to use these 3 machines. Sometimes you can get around this by slowing down your machine so it's not taking as much stress, but usually with things like crushing wheels, things along those lines, you're just going to need more power in your system to basically correct the overstressing issue. So the next thing that I want to go over is belts. Now, belts can be used to transport items like I've gone over in that other video, but I did want to go over that you can use them to transport power, but there is a downside to them, and this is something that I've even been yelled at in my stream for doing. So as you can see, we have our water wheel power source going into a stressometer, and you can see it's already saying that it's 6% stressed. Now, the stressometer itself is not going to give off stress, but we've actually connected a belt to take power from the top and rotate it down 1 block, and it's actually already used 16 stress units from using a mechanical belt. So there is a downside to using belts to transport power. Now, you're probably wondering, all right, so Rocket, what would you use in this situation? What I would use in this situation is I would take a small cogwheel, we'll just break this whole mess, and simply just connect 2 small cogwheels like so. And you can see we're now back down to 0% stress. So usually there's ways to use shafts, gearboxes, cogwheels, other ways of transporting power without actually causing stress in your system and later having you to build more water wheels, more windmills, things along those lines to power your system. So I recommend using a belt as a last case scenario. Don't be like me and still use them in your system and just cover them up and pretend they're not there. Go ahead and use cogwheels, shafts, gearboxes, things along those lines. So just like the speedometer, the stressometer can also give off a redstone signal. Now, this is not based on the speed of the system. Don't get confused with that. This redstone signal is simply off of the amount of stress that is on the system currently. So you can see right now we have a creative motor going in, and of course a creative motor has almost 300,000 stress units that it can take, but we're causing a minus 128 stress units from our crushing wheel, so it is causing a little bit of stress on the system. Of course, it says 0%, but you can look at the numbers and see that we are down a little bit, and it is giving off a weak redstone signal. So the more crushing wheels that we add, the more stress that it would end up giving. Again, since we're using a creative motor, it's not going to give that much of a redstone signal, but you can get the gist that the more stress you add to your system, the more redstone signals it goes off. So same thing you could use is like a redstone lamp or something to have a warning pop up when your system's getting close to stressing out, or something along those lines in like a factory that you are building. All right, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is encased chain drives. And this is something that I don't really use much in my builds, and that's really a kind of disadvantage for all of my builds that I've done. So an encased chain drive is essentially a mix of like shafts and gearboxes and cogwheels. And the way it works is you have a power source going into an encased chain drive, and you connect a bunch of them together, and it'll allow you to transport power horizontally, but you can also twist them like so. So you can see our power was going vertically, and then it twists up and goes into this speedometer. You can see that as our power source is going in, that it's creating 16 RPMs on every one of these guys, and it's not creating stress, which is really awesome because you're able to transport power in many different directions and even twist it without creating any stress and keeping the same amount of speed throughout the whole system. A quick little example is something that I have used it before in my builds, is that you can twist your chain drives. So you can see that we have our power source coming into this mechanical belt, and then I attached a chain drive to this mechanical belt, twisted it up, and sent the power into this mechanical belt as well. This would be something that if we didn't use encased chain drives and we only really had gearboxes and things along those lines, that this could create a little bit of a problem depending on how your system is working. So usually encased chain drives, if you need to twist any type of power source, this is the way to go to just use these guys. So something that we're now going to talk about is adjustable chain gear shifts. Now, these are going to get a little bit complicated, and I want to warn you guys ahead of time. So basically, we have our encased chain drive set up right here, and then at the very end, we have an adjustable chain gear shift with a power source underneath going into it. Now, the adjustable chain gear shift, what it's doing now is that we have our 16 RPMs going right out through the adjustable chain gear shift. But if we look at the other guys, we've actually doubled our RPM voltage to the other guys. So the one that has the power source going into gets 16. The other two are going to 32 RPMs, and that's based on our redstone signal. So if we shut it off, they'll all be now set to 16 RPMs. If we power it on, it's now 16, and the rest get 32. And this is solely based off of the redstone signal entering the adjustable chain gear shift, as well as where the power source is coming from. So right now we have our power source coming into the adjustable chain gear shift, but let's say we have the same system, but we put our power source into a different encased chain drive, so the one down here, and then activate our redstone signal. It's actually what it's done is it's set all of these guys to 16 RPMs and then shrunk this one to 8 RPM. So it's slowed this one down and kept these the normal speed. Again, if you haven't really messed with much RPMs and things along those lines, this probably all just went over your head. Don't panic. This is much more for the advanced users, in my opinion, because this is allowing you to control on how many RPMs you want to basically output depending on the machine that you're having it connect to. And we're going to continue with that in a few seconds. Now that we know that we can adjust our power depending on what we're looking for, we can actually connect to this exact same system with an analog lever. And this is something that Create has added for us. So we have our power source going into our adjustable chain gear shift. With it not activated at all, everything has been set to 16 RPMs. And with the analog switch, we can actually go ahead and flick it 15 different times to set the amount of redstone signal that we want to send into our adjustable chain gear shift. So if I select it to just one, the first one is set to 16 RPMs, so the one that has the power source connected. And then the next one is 18, and they continue to be 18. So we can click this up, and it basically goes in short increments. So you can see we have now 20. We can click it again. We're now at 21. So you can really fine tune the amount of RPMs you want to give off throughout your system. So multiple adjustable chain gear shifts, multiple encased chain drives, and multiple analog switches will allow you to have one power source going in and changing the RPMs depending on what you're looking for your entire system. Really helpful if you get into some really advanced systems and you're really just trying to make the most you can out of a single power source. You can use this. Really complicated concept, especially for a newer user. I know this would fly over my head if I looked at this a month ago, but I know it's worth pointing out because I know there's a lot of veterans that watch my videos and they probably didn't know about this system. All right, so let's bring it back down. Let's go into some much more basic versions of things in the Create mod. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the clutch. So what we have here is we have a creative motor going through a shaft into a clutch, and then shafts into a speedometer outputting 16 RPMs. Now a clutch just needs a redstone signal, and when you activate it, the power source goes in and it stops. Now this is something that I've used a clutch before in a couple different machines, but I figured I'd show it off as it's a way to basically kill the power to your system. This is great for if you're lagging a lot using the Create mod, build clutches into your system, and when you're not using a system, flick a lever and shut the whole system off. It'll make it so your game doesn't lag as much. I actually require this in my Rocket World server, so if you're interested in playing on a Create server, feel free to go ahead and check that out in the description. I had to self-promote a little bit. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the gear shift, and I've used this in previous videos before, that a gear shift, all it does is right here we have our power source going in through our gear shift, and you can see it's rotating in the same direction, but as soon as we basically connect the redstone to it, it'll actually switch directions. So we have it going in, it's turning clockwise, and then it changes to the opposite direction to go into the speedometer. It doesn't change the speed, it just changes the direction. So you can use this if your belt's moving the wrong direction and you just want to place like a lever on top of Gearshift and flick it. That will fix it as well. You could also use gearboxes, which I've done in the past, to switch directions, but if you want a more cleaner look, you can use a Gearshift as well. Now, the last thing I'm going to go over is something I wasn't sure if I was going to include in this video, and that is our sequenced gear shifts. Now, I'm going to show on how I've used sequenced gear shifts to build a door. If you're interested in doors and gates and things along those lines, I've made a video on that will pop up on the screen now that you can go ahead and check out. But I want to talk about on what they can be used for, but this is more of a redstone item in my opinion, but I figured it was worth covering it because I know a lot of people are going to have questions about this. So what I've done here is when I press a button, it's actually activating these sequence gear shifts with a power source and a mechanical bearing, and it's made a door for us. Now, what we have done here is if you right click on a sequence gear shift, it's basically a much more complicated gear shift than the regular one. So what I've done in here is I've set it so that when the redstone signal is sent to it and it has a power source, that it's going to go ahead and turn the rotational power source that's connected to our mechanical bearing 90 degrees forwards. then it's going to be delayed by 6 seconds, and then it will turn 90 degrees backwards, and then it will end the system. And that is every time it gets a power source. Now, you can do much more complicated or less complicated things with this by just looking at the instructions. You can turn by angle, you can turn to move pistons, pulleys, and gantries. You can set time delays, which I have. You can await new redstone pulses before it does things, and then you can even base all of these things off of angles, based off seconds, ticks, and then you can even input speed in reversed or double speed and things along those lines. This gets a lot more complicated than what I really want to cover in this video, but I have gone over a majority of this inside of basically my doors and gates video and how to do things along those lines. So I recommend checking that out if you really want to dive deeper, but I felt like showing this off was a good idea for this type of video. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed. I know that this was probably a lot more complicated than the item transportation video, and I know that when I started Create Mod on my own in January, that a lot of this was super confusing for me. I had never messed with anything along these lines, and it was really hard for me to jump into something like this. So I expect that this video is going to have a lot of questions, so please ask them in the comments. Please hop into my Discord and post in the help channel. I will be more than happy to help you through any of these guys. If you think I missed something, or if you think I got something wrong in the video, leave a comment. I'm not perfect, I can tell you that right now, but I have been using these things for months, so I figured I'd go ahead and make a video kind of covering all of this stuff. But yeah. If you guys enjoyed this video, drop a like, feel free to subscribe, and yeah, I will see you guys all in the next one.